So if you had the time to travel back through time and change something in your past, I think a lot of us would want a chance to help us succeed in the future. Now, unfortunately, there are no second chances, and your best bet is to be as prepared as possible for that first impression. So I'm talking to an expert in first and second chances. Nick Singh is an authority on interview prep for the technology field. He interned as a data engineer at Google and worked as a growth engineer at Facebook. He's the co-author of Ace the Data Science Interview and founder of DataLemur.com, a way to practice hundreds of real SQL interview questions for free. Nick, I think most people don't even know how to get in front of a huge tech company like Google. A few weeks ago, Logan Kilpatrick from OpenAI mentioned that when he came on the show that he applied 500 times. How did you get your proverbial first foot in the door in Google, and what should Logan have done to maybe just shorten that to like 100 applications?
Applying online. First of all, Ray, thanks for having me. And
My pleasure.
Into it. Let's go help Logan. I actually know Logan in real life, so shout out Logan, and let's figure it out. He's a smart guy. He's working at OpenAI, so he ended up doing fine. But if you're ever in that situation, you're trying to apply, you're not able to break through. I'm a huge fan of cold emails and cold DMs, which means not just hitting easy apply, not just applying for the job on the company website, but actually reaching out to the hiring manager or reaching out to the recruiter, sending them a pitch, emailing them more about yourself and why you think you're a good person for the job. Same way, sending them a LinkedIn connection request, asking them for an informational interview, basically just putting yourself forward rather than just being a random person that gets screened out in the ATS. That's like a big thing that I've learned. I kind of noticed this, actually. You asked me about how did I get my break at Google. I've actually noticed this because in part of stories like the Google story, which is that my friend had, so in the Bay Area, there were all these intern open houses where companies would throw an event to meet interns who are interested in working at their company in the future. So one of those such companies that held an open house was called Google's Nest Labs. Now, here's the problem. I was interning at Microsoft in Seattle, and this was an event in San Francisco Bay Area. So I just said, shoot, let me just RSVP to the event and then like not show up just so that they have my email, their resume, all those things on file. Because practically I know that the RSVP is more like to collect my resume. Of course, after the event, a month later, they're like, hey, sorry we missed you, but you seem like a smart person. You were interning at Microsoft. Do you want to start the interview process with Google? And I'm like, hell yeah, I do. So
Nice.
That's what happened. Now, another really interesting thing in this story is that actually they sent me this email and I'm like, hell yeah, I want to interview at Google. And then it was crickets. And then I sent another email. Hey, thanks for reaching out to me. How do we get started? Nothing. I sent a third email. Hey, I'm still super excited. Are you guys still hiring? I want to start the interview process. At that point, the recruiter says, hey, sorry, we dropped the ball. We still really like you. Let's start talking. Let's schedule a first interview. So through this process, I learned two things. First of all, damn, I interviewed, I RSVP'd to an event I didn't even show up at. And that was like a channel to interview at Google's Nest Lab. So that told me like, whoa, there's so many more ways to apply than just simply online. And the second painful thing I learned is persistence actually really matters, because you'd like to think every recruiter out there is like not dropping the ball and on top of things. But in practice, in that situation, I had to advocate for myself. They were already interested in me, and still, for whatever reason, I wasn't getting my interview scheduled. So that was actually me just being kind of annoying and following up 3 times saying, hey, you guys wrote to me first. Let's like make something happen. So those are the 2 types of lessons where I realized, okay, this game of getting an interview, of applying to jobs, it's not as straightforward as just hitting easy apply. There's a lot of things about being persistent and trying to look for other avenues and trying to actually meet people and talk to people that actually can lead you to interviews, rather than just thinking of these companies as black boxes where you throw in your resume and you just pray for the best.
Yeah, what a great story. I love that, because a lot of people don't sort of realize the power of those meetings, those events that happen. And you really found a way to sort of hack the meeting by making sure that at the very least you were in some sort of mailing list for the event. That is so brilliant, and that's why I love talking to you, and why I love like the book that you wrote, which I just got. So I haven't dog-eared it that much, but I really love the first and the last chapter. And you talk a lot about those like interview hacks and something that just seems really bold, the sort of cold emails, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So say, okay, so you got your foot in the door and now you're kind of arriving at this very scary thing, the technology interviews that everybody's really concerned about. What are some of the sort of top misconceptions that people have about these technology interviews?
One thing I learned very quickly through going through the interview gauntlet at a lot of top tech companies, fan companies, and having internet, Microsoft, Google, worked at Facebook, all that. What I learned was you can actually prepare. Now, here's the funny thing. People will make up all these kind of stories on how you can't prepare. Oh, they can ask you anything. It's not possible to prepare. Or, oh, if you got good grades in school anyways, you don't need to prepare because your GPA can carry you through, or your like base knowledge can carry you through. What I quickly realized through interviewing at these top companies is interviewing is a real skill. It's disjoint from the technical knowledge. It's sorry, maybe not fully disjoint. Like obviously interviewing for a software engineer or data science position is related to software and data science. But I mean to
Mm-hmm.
say, doing well in the schools, doing well in your exam, making really good open source contributions, that's all great. But that's still a different skill than positioning yourself and acing a technical interview. So that was one big misconception that I always am having to correct with people. Now, software engineering interviews are a lot more structured than data science interviews. Usually they're testing data structures and algorithms, and there's a lot of resources out there to help software engineers with their interview, including the book Cracking the Coding Interview, which actually
Mm-hmm.
inspired me to write my book, Ace the Data Science
Yeah,
Interview. It's like a direct, like if you notice it, there will be a lot of commonalities and a lot of like
yeah.
inspiration. It's even like her book is bright green. Gail McDowell, author of
That's
Cracking the
right.
Coding, is bright green. I was like, all right, if she's bright green, I'll be bright red. So she's been a big inspiration. And because her books helped me prepare for these job
Mm-hmm.
interviews, and I'm like, wow, data science is a lot more open ended. So preparing there is a little bit harder. And again, because data science and data analytics is so much more open ended, this idea that you can't prepare is even more rife because
Mm-hmm.
people are even more saying, hey, between statistics and product sense and SQL and coding and machine learning and some math, who knows what they're going to ask me? So why even prepare? Let's just show up and wing it. So that's the biggest misconception I'm always trying to tackle, that, hey, even if it seems like they can ask anything, most companies tend to ask similar things, and there's common patterns, strategies, and frameworks you can use to tackle some of these most common interview questions.
That is also amazing. Yeah, very famous book. I've seen that book, and what I like about your book is that it's definitely more focused, and that people can get a lot more out of it. I think because of like I said, the beginning and the end are riveting. I'm not a data scientist, so the formulas were like a little much for me. But I really love what you talked about in the 10th chapter, which is about product and some of these like really like practical tips for getting your foot in the door. And I thought that the cold calling emails is great, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. So, talk a little bit about the process that you use for this, cold calling or cold emailing. You call it. You already talked about so many tips already about just showing up, being prepared, but understanding that maybe there's like no exact way to prepare, I guess, for these things, unless you have been with them. Uh, do you recommend that people kind of begin with like maybe a smaller company or just go straight for like Microsoft and these huge companies?
I think you should apply everywhere, especially in today's technology climate where a
Mm,
lot of these big companies have hiring freezes, or some startups are struggling to raise funding and again are having hiring freezes and layoffs. I think if you're early in your career, just apply everywhere, and see what happens. I
be-
think that most people aren't in a position to be picky just by nature of like,
mhm.
if you are really advanced and you can be picky, and then you just only apply to the most selective companies, and then again you're stuck in that position where it's like, oh, I only have a few offers because I didn't bother applying to everywhere. So basically I don't worry about that kind of thing. I loved my time working at startups. Most recently I worked at Safegraph for nearly 2 years, where I held a variety of
Mhm.
data, product, and evangelism roles. So I do love startups. having worked at these big companies, they were awesome. Free food's great, perks are great, but I also love the startup life. I mean, that's why I'm running datalemur.com myself
Hmm.
as a startup, because truly that's where my heart lies. But yeah, I think wherever you can start your career is great. I think the bigger thing is the kind of effort you put into that first job, or the effort you put into like executing on those projects and like spending extra time outside of work to learn. That's actually probably a bigger driver of success than, what company you work at or what brand name, you have on your resume early in your career, because you can kind of outwork any disadvantages, I think, in the first few years in your career.
Yeah, and I think that even with what everybody's talking about, which is like AI and some of the things that we've seen with the market shifting, with people having to come back to the office, I saw in the latest Stack Overflow survey that developers are still in demand. They're still making good money, and that there's still sort of a lot of opportunity, especially in these new fields, like, well, not new fields, but in these fields like data science and machine learning, AI. They're still hiring a lot of people, and they need that pipeline of new talent. So it doesn't matter that you just got out of school. I think that there's still a lot of opportunities. So let's go ahead and get into this concept of like cold emails, which you have a lot of examples in your book, which I really like. There's actually like templates, a lot of like emails that you've used in the past. So talk a little bit about how that works.
Yeah, so I guess the whole point of cold emails is the idea that you don't have to know the person you're writing to, whether it's a LinkedIn DM, an in-mail, a email, a Twitter DM, whatever platform you use. The point is you can write to people you don't know. And most people aren't going to be annoyed if you write, if you're a stranger and you're writing to them, as long as the message you keep is relevant, friendly, shows that you've put in some effort. So that's basically the bulk of what cold emailing is all about. How do we get noticed, and how do we form a personal connection, and how do I show that I'm relevant? Because a resume is great and it's one thing, but a lot of people don't read resumes. When you apply online, you get filtered out through the ATS. Maybe no human maybe even will read your resume. But if you send a person a DM and you personalize it and you say, "Hey Ray, I saw you do LinkedIn Learning, and I do a lot of online education too. In fact, here's a link to my Udemy course, and here's my link to my
Hmm.
LinkedIn course. How do I, can I talk to you about online course creation and job opportunities at LinkedIn?" That would catch your attention, right? Or if I said, "Hey Ray, I saw your course on GitHub. It's super awesome. I actually made my own courses too, and I hope to be working on LinkedIn. How do we make this happen?" Right? That will at least catch your attention compared to, "Hey Ray, I want job." Right? Like, and that's kind of what you're
So true.
competing with.
Yeah,
And how do I
yeah.
know this? Is because every day I get DMs from people like, "Hi Nick, I want job." And I'm like, Okay, I don't know what to do. Like, um, and
Yeah,
this
that's
used
what
to
I like.
happen
I
to.
I like that you the titles that you have here, like on the book. Ex Google and Microsoft intern interested in working full time at Periscope Data. Like that is when you're navigating and think about you know people like perhaps you and me who have like a large kind of follower audience, or if you're a CEO, you're just getting slammed with a lot of stuff all day. So definitely that attention getting title,
Yeah,
and very friendly and very focused. And you're highlighting, your advantages that you have in there. That's really good. I love that about the examples that you have.
you got to show that you're respond worthy, right? And again, I
Hmm.
want to like emphasize, this cold email tactic is not gonna, it's not like a panacea. It's not gonna work every time. It's still a numbers game. I still got rejected, maybe one in 10 emails people will respond back to me, even after I'd been able to intern at Google and run a little startup in my college days. Still,
Hmm.
most people ignored me. But the thing is, you only need one job, you only need one internship, right? So even if 1 in 10 people ignore you, if if even if 9 in 10 people ignore you, if 1 in 10 get back to you and you're like, "Hey, you seem pretty interesting, like let's talk, let's do an informational interview, or let me refer you to somebody," we're making moves, then we're making something happen. So that's one.
Mm.
The second thing I want to cover is, it cold emails don't usually work, and we're already talking after you developed a base of portfolio projects and like a base of like why you should be respond worthy. Because again, I don't want to tell people like, "Hey, if you have no work experience and no projects and nothing to show off, you can't expect a cold email or DM to work." It only
Hmm.
works when you put in that work previously and you put out work, especially if you've done work in public, whether it's a public Medium article, whether you've put out your code on GitHub and you have a popular repo, maybe you have a portfolio project, maybe you've made a beautiful data visualization that went viral on Reddit's Our Data is Beautiful subreddit, whatever it
Hmm.
is, as long as you have something worth showing off, something you can actually point to, then it works out. If we don't have that, well, let's not even worry about cold emails. Let's not even try to put our hopes on emailing random people because it's not going to work.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people do focus on perhaps only the relationship part. And I think they miss that aspect of I also have to, even though I'm making having a relationship with an individual that perhaps can get me, sort of a position or something in the company, that person doesn't really know you. So you have to immediately give him or her relevant information so that in their mind they're kind of building their own portfolio. And I like the way that you said, hey, Ray, I love your course, I've been doing some things myself, here's some links that you can watch. How do you get into perhaps course development? Like, that's somebody that I want to help because I can go
Right.
check out their work, I can verify the quality. So one thing is, like, I'm not going to recommend anybody just that says that they want to build a course if they don't show me anything. Because I know
Right.
that the people that I'm going to recommend to are going to want that as well. What have they done? Where can we see samples of their work? So that is
Yeah.
really the critical thing. And I think that that's one of the keys for an interview is how do you stand out from the rest of the candidates? So what are perhaps some other ways that you can, differentiate yourself from others? You mentioned, I think, GitHub. What else?
So I think I love this concept of portfolio projects as using them to differentiate yourself from everybody else. And I
Hmm.
think that people might think, okay, well, what else besides portfolio projects? But let's like dig in into portfolio projects because I think there's so much there that gets overlooked. So first off, one big thing that I always talk to people about is what you just mentioned, Ray, how you were saying that you needed links to other courses. People forget to put their work out in public. Like they have a
Hmm.
GitHub repo, but it's marked private. Or maybe it's public,
Mm.
but they don't have a README. Or maybe their README is a bunch of random stuff on how to install the package rather than something like, "Hi, I'm used by 50,000 people and I help automate DevOps." And
Mm.
then a bunch of, instructions on installation, right? Because when you're showing off a GitHub link and I'm trying to send it to somebody else, they don't want to see a bajillion lines of code with no context. They're looking for like, what is this that you've linked me to? Is it public? If I needed to poke into it, I can poke into it, but 99% of people are lazy. We're not going to poke into it. We just need to see this exists and, oh, look, it has 200 stars and, oh, look, the developer claims it's used by 50 people. Great. We're good to go. So I think
Mhm.
that's one big thing. That was a more software engineering focused example,
Mhm.
linking to GitHub. Let's say you're a data analyst, you don't know source control, you don't use Git. Well, can you have a public dashboard using Tableau Public, right? Tableau
Mhm.
Public's free. It's a drag and drop tool. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to use Tableau, but you can make some really dope visualizations using Tableau. Well, so if you're applying to any BI job or any data analyst job and you say, hey, I know data viz, saying you know data viz is way different than saying, hey, I love the 2022 World Cup, so I built a dashboard that summarized all the soccer stats that lets you explore team by team performance. Here's a link in case you happen to love soccer. That that
Mhm.
that will still get my attention even if I don't love soccer. I'll still be like, let's see
Mhm.
what this person's made, or like let's see their talent, let's see their skills. So I think that's a big thing, like having a link and making sure that link is thoughtful. It's not a
Mhm.
link to a README with a bunch of gobbledygook. It's not a link to a code. It's a link to something that will catch someone's attention. Whether it's
Mhm.
a beautiful README, if it's an infographic, whether it's a Tableau dashboard, something I can actually do something with. So I think that's one big thing for a portfolio project that I always tell people to do. The second one is try to align it to your dream industry, or try to align it to your passion, right? I guess maybe this umbrella term for it is passion, right? Whether you're
Mhm.
passionate about a certain industry or you're passionate about music or you're passionate about sports, if you can make some project about your passion, what I've found is that it helps you kind of sound like a more passionate person about like life in general, data in general, tech in general, if you happen to be passionate about some subset thing. What I mean by that is, let me re-explain myself. I did a project on hip hop music called Rapstock.io, which was like a stock market for rappers. I know, pretty weird, right? But think of it like fantasy football, where instead of betting on football players, you could bet on and kind of long and short different artists. So a stock market for rappers, basically. The thing is, I was really passionate about Drake and I was really passionate about music. But when people, when in interviews talk to me about rap stock, basically my passion for not just Drake and hip hop music came out, but my passion for data came out, and my passion for building products came out, and my
Hmm.
passion for building for consumers came out, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
excitedly talking about how I'm serving the music community, and I'm excitedly talking about the numbers of my app, and I'm excitedly talking to you about how I built the features and how I built the algorithm for pricing each artist using Spotify data. And suddenly I'm having a great time talking about these things because I love music and I love data. But what
Hmm.
you're getting out of this, Ray, is, oh, this guy seems like someone who's like an interesting person. He's not passive, like
Hmm.
he's doing things. Sure, maybe this hip hop music project doesn't have to have a lot to do with my healthcare data science company, but clearly, if this guy can get excited about music and do this and build something out in public, maybe he can go analyze, insurance claims for my healthcare company, right? And I know it
Hmm.
doesn't seem logical, like, wait, what does one passion have to do with another? But when you just put yourself out there and you show you're just like a passionate person about data and technology and doing things, that's enough for most companies, because most people aren't that passionate. Most people just say they like data, and then you ask them, "Oh, can you show me a data project?" And they're like, "Well, I have a group project from 3 years ago where I did a little bit of the work. I don't have a link for it, and low key, I forgot what I did because it was 3 years ago. It was a group project. I barely did anything." And it's like, okay, great. You
See,
claim you're
like
data science, and
I feel like I'm not passionate like about Drake. I do love music, and I think that there's something that people can relate to in terms of the excitement.
yeah,
That just if we just were talking dryly about, I don't know, data regression or
yeah,
whatever, programming, it's just not the same as, yeah, I built this thing that I really loved. I'd love to do the same thing, and I learned so much from this project. I mean, there's just I could tell how excited you were just from hearing you talk, and
yeah,
I feel like you also always find uh, in whatever you're doing, I think you're going to find that people can find things in you that reminds them of themselves. Like I know when I was reading about your history with Rap Stock, you mentioned that you used to DJ in high school. Well,
yeah,
I used to DJ in high school. So, but like, it's not, I'm not into Drake, but we now have something in common. And so that's really
exactly.
awesome that we can connect on that. And, that's a better conversation than me just talking to you about, data models and stuff.
Exactly. And after we finish a job interview, it's like, oh, we like that guy. That guy used to be a DJ and he did all this music
That's
stuff.
right.
Maybe that doesn't have to do with healthcare data, but somewhere between talking about hip hop, talking about betting, talking about music, talking about DJing, talking about data and pricing and stock markets, usually the person on the other side of the conversation has some interest in the stock market or fantasy sports or
Hmm.
music or Drake. Like there's some way to connect, because there's a lot of
Hmm.
DJs out there. There's a lot of people who love music. There's a lot of people who like
That's right.
betting. A lot of people like the
Yeah.
stock market. There's something there. And even if you don't like all those things, they like data science, which is literally why, my project was a data project around how do we price these artists and like kind of facilitate this marketplace of betting on rappers,
Hmm.
which is kind of like, hey, even if you don't like any of the things we just talked about, at least you like data science because you work at a
Hmm.
healthcare data company and I like data science too, applied to music, but we still have something in common. We love data. So I think building a project is like such a way to stand out. And as
Hmm.
I just demonstrated, it doesn't even have to be relevant to insurance or health insurance if that's where you're applying. As long as you do something you're passionate about, you analyze basketball or movies or hip hop music, whatever. It's able to kind of elevate your presence and elevate who you are. And listen, a lot of this job stuff is also like likability and like personality. And
Yeah. You also
you don't
mentioned
have to
that
like music or
you need to.
anything. Yeah.
I'm sorry. You also mentioned that I really love that you said that you have to know your target audience and how like your first, whether it's a resume or a LinkedIn profile, that it should be targeting not the data engineer who's working on the project, but the recruiter. And that's a
Yeah.
different audience. And so you need to, what do recruiters like? They like to see numbers related to something
Yeah.
real, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly. And here's the thing. And that's why people always, they come back at me and be like, Nick, you didn't use deep learning in your project, or Nick, really, you think a Tableau dashboard can make moves like, why you didn't write 7,000 lines of Python code? Like, how are you going to ever stand out? And I'm like, look, by the time we're in an interview and you ask me technical questions, you give me a SQL interview, you give me a Python interview, fine, I'll ace those things. But getting my foot in the door with the hiring manager or the recruiter, getting my cold emails read, getting my cold DMs read, they're not happening because I wrote 7,000 lines of Python code. They're happening because they're like, oh, I love music too. Let's see your
Hmm.
project. Or, oh, yeah, I work at Spotify and you did a music project. That's great. Let's talk. Or, hey, I work at S&P 500 or NASDAQ. You made a little stock market of rappers. We literally make the stock market. Let's talk. I mean, there's something here, right? So
Hmm.
little connections like that can really help you out. And I think people always think like, oh, I thought to be impressive, you had to use some really crazy deep learning algorithm. And I'm like, no, the bar is actually a lot lower.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, people are all humans. So as long as you can tell a good story and you have something to show off, which is why I go back to the Tableau dashboard, having
Hmm.
a beautiful little thing like that is far better than 7,000 lines of code on GitHub with no
Hmm.
explanation, no visual, no readme, and it's just sort of there.
That's so true. And I think that, just understanding that relationships, especially at the beginning of getting your foot in the door, you're talking to perhaps a recruiter who's maybe on his or her 50th candidate that they've looked at. They've been watching Tableau, numbers, data analytics. Like everybody has the same, sort of aptitude or apparent aptitude just in terms of like the resume. So I think if you bring that personality into it, you're going to find that, yeah, maybe they were DJs in high school, which is something you and I share in common. Every person that I've interviewed in the show, I've been able to connect with in some way. And even when
Yeah.
I don't necessarily, like, we had Cassie Kusserkoff last week, and I was talking to her about Sadie St. Lawrence because they both shared, sort of an interest in psychology, neuroscience. Like, it's really interesting that you find as, I guess maybe as a developer, these patterns in people.
Yeah.
And then so you can relate to others. We talked about Logan and how we both know him, and we're now trying to help him out and get him to reduce the quantity of his applications for perhaps the future, although I don't think you'll have a problem. So let's say that you already got your foot in the door, you've got your first job. What should your plan be after that? You've got a job. What should you think about in terms of like career path? How long should you stay? What are some of the strategies that you're working on after that first sort of you've got in, patting yourself in the back? What do we do now?
I'm not an expert on this because I'm definitely still early in my career. I'm not a
Yeah.
CTO. I'm not a VP of engineering. I'm out here doing my random stuff with the book and data lemur. So, with that 2 cents, I would like to just say that one thing is it's pretty easy, not pretty easy to advance, but I'm saying the amount of people who give a shit in a job is actually surprisingly less than you'd think. So it's really funny how much just caring a little bit can be a competitive advantage. Like, hey, you actually like your work and you care about your coworkers, you care about the product, you care about the end success. Because it's really easy for people to get jaded in a lot of products and a lot of work, or jaded with their company, or jaded with their leadership. So I think not being jaded and just trying to find things that keep you interested in the job or keep you
Hmm.
interested in the vision is a competitive advantage. And that might also mean kind of like gaslighting your brain into being like, okay, you know what? Health insurance claims is not the most fun thing, but let's go get excited about it, or let's go find something excited about it, or let's find a way to like wake up every day that we're excited about this,
Hmm.
rather than on Monday morning we're thinking, damn it, like what's happening for the weekend, or like how do I take PTO off, or like how do I do the least amount of work before my manager yells at me? Because surprisingly, a lot of people are doing that to kind of just get by. So that would be probably my main thing. It's just like do a good job at work. Like don't try to overcomplicate it, and like give a shit. Like care about what you're doing. And
Yeah.
I think that's I found to be like surprisingly rare than I would have expected. Maybe I was
Mm.
a idealistic person in school, and then having worked a little bit, I see how people get jaded, and I get less jaded because I'm just like an excitable person, I guess.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that's like just a me thing, but that's one thing I've noticed. The other big thing I would just like to tell people in their careers, because I work with a lot of career switchers, because so many
Hmm.
people from a variety of backgrounds are always switching into AI and data science right now, especially. I've always just told people like, hey, we always think of our careers as too rigid. I think it's because the generation before us, people worked at the same company for so long or had the same kind of job title for so long. And now we can kind of see like the way the world's moving. People are switching faster than ever. People are switching their titles faster than ever. What we called a BI engineer might be called a data scientist now, and then they might be trying to be an AI engineer later. And that kind of job hopping was not really a thing maybe 30 years ago, where
Hmm.
people were like senior lawyer or like associate lawyer, or like very tracked jobs were there, like software engineer 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then senior, and then manager.
Hmm.
We live in a really weird world right now where you can actually like job hunt, especially across data. Like there's just so many different niches. So I just like tell people, like, think of your career as more flexible than you would immediately think. My personal take on this is when I was in school, I did not like writing. And now I have a best-selling book. I mean, Ace a Data Science
Hmm.
Interview has sold 27,000 copies. It's the #1 bestseller on Amazon. And I literally don't like to write. I avoided all liberal arts classes in college because I didn't want to write. I
Hmm.
thought of myself as a bad writer. And this is just like, yeah, sure, maybe I'm on the extreme to go from not liking writing to now making my living as a writer. Even though I went to school for engineering and think of myself as like total tech nerd and programmer. Of course, I'm an edge case, but I just like to tell people like, oh, look at the kind of growth you can do if you just put your mind to something, and also look at the kind of like weirdness life affords you, because we always think your living is your 9 to 5, and then there's like things like being a course instructor and like posting on LinkedIn and
Hmm.
writing a newsletter and then hosting a podcast and making an open source thing and consulting, and suddenly you realize, okay, your career is much wider than you would have thought initially, because in today's day and age, we can do all these things while holding on a 9 to 5. And I don't know if that was possible in the past because we didn't have Upwork, we didn't have social media, we didn't have blogging, we didn't have ways to make side incomes the way we do now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that there's also a lot of things that you can do where you're at in terms of finding something that you want to try. A lot of good managers or good bosses will allow you to do things that, perhaps you may have to do it like on your own time. But if you want to pursue something that is related to your job, ask somebody to allow you to pursue, sort of a side project that is related to your jobs. I know, oftentimes when I get to that rut in my current job, I try to look for things that are going to, I don't know, just make me really happy about what I'm doing. This series of live streams that I've done has been part of that. But then I also started working, with GitHub like almost 10 years ago. And that became eventually like a partnership with GitHub, an internal project within the company that changed how everybody did everything. And that was just, I think that there's a way that we can use GitHub to host our repositories. And I'm just going to not this this is kind of funny, but I'm not necessarily going to ask anybody, but I'm going to try to see how this would work. And as I started using it, other people found out and then they got into it. And it eventually became like a legit sort of internal project in the company. And, eventually you can become like the hero of the Republic just because you had that, I don't know, ability to not just, focus on what you're doing, but try to look for what else you could be doing that would be super exciting to you. And I've definitely noticed that in you.
You're exactly right. And I love that story. I think one thing you mentioned was doing it on your time. A good
Hmm.
boss maybe says, oh, you can have some time to do it. But in practice, if you really want to make moves, you have to kind of find this extra time to do these kind of things, because most bosses don't really like you putzing around too much on random
That's
things,
right.
but that's kind of where some of the best things happen. And
Yeah, I
you
think you
don't
have
know
to
which things are a
prove,
fit.
you have to prove, if you just tell somebody an idea, a lot of times they can't visualize it. But if you
Yeah.
show them the idea, then they can see how it's beneficial. And, like I said, during our pre-show, like this whole entire stream is something that I think I'm going to see a lot of things come from it. Even though it was just like, why does Ray want to do a crazy weekly series? I think that some things are longer term projects. And so
Yeah.
you have to have that kind of attitude. Let's try something. And if it doesn't work, you try something else. But that's what makes it exciting.
Exactly. No, I love that. And now let me share my actual story, which
Hmm.
is very close to actually what you were mentioning with GitHub. How did I go from working at Facebook and engineering to now being a content creator, a data person, and like making my living through a book? Well, it's actually because back in 2018, as I was transitioning and leaving Facebook to join that startup, I said, you know what? I learned about how to get jobs at big tech. Let me share what I know on LinkedIn. And at that point, I had about 1,000 connections. Now, 5 years later, I have 150,000 connections on LinkedIn. And
Mm,
the growth that happened was I basically just started putting up career posts and blog posts and just like posting on LinkedIn thinking, maybe this will help someone. Let's see what happens. I don't know. And then slowly and slowly got more likes and more connections and more followers. So when COVID hit, you had mentioned seeing is believing, and you have to kind of do these small things you don't know where they're going to lead to. In COVID, that's when I realized to my own self, oh wow, I have 50,000 followers now,
mhm,
have put out consistently some career advice for now like 2.5, 3 years. I bet you if I could put it all together, we'd have like half a book or maybe a book already.
mhm,
And basically, this idea of, hey, the career is a lot wider. You can just do things and do things small and then see what happens is literally how I got to the book. Because I didn't think of myself as a writer. I didn't like writing, but with that many 50,000 followers on LinkedIn, plus being able to write consistently for 2.5 years, it gave me the
mhm,
confidence to do this thing. Just like you might not have gone and done this whole GitHub initiative, but you did a little things and it slowly snowballed. And you did things in your side time, and then you became this, authority on GitHub, um, basically for the world on LinkedIn Learning and all these things. So, yeah, I think that's like my one career advice is like take these like small things seriously, try a bunch of different things, and like keep at it consistently, all while trying to give a shit about your main job, right? I'm never
that's
still
right.
saying,
Yeah,
ignore
yeah,
your
and I
main
think
work.
that it's always been easier for me to like prove something as opposed to talk about something. I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know if maybe I just have poor communication skills, but sometimes I feel like you said, if you have the project that shows what you can do, that's a much easier conversation than trying to have a presentation about what you think it could be.
Yeah,
If you have 50,000 followers, that's something that you can do something with. If you have a project about Wrap.io, that you can leverage the things that you've done into something else, and opportunities will sometimes like drop in your lap from things that you've done before that you didn't even know had an impact, right?
exactly. No, I mean that's literally how when I pitched my co-author Kevin Ho, he was a former data scientist at Facebook. He had worked on Wall Street as a quant. He also is not a writer by any means or like ever thought he would do this, but when I pitched him, hey, maybe we can do something, it literally came from like seeing is believing and just like, oh well, let's try it out, let's both put out our stuff in public and see what happens. And yeah, after 6 months of doing that and having built up these small little content pieces, small little tips, small little blog posts, we saw, okay, we have traction and why not just do it? So it's not just useful for other people. Seeing is believing is not just for other people, it's for our own selves to build confidence, right? Like if you're scared to
Mm-hmm.
make a startup, you're scared to post content, you're scared to do something, you just take baby steps, like you yourself will see it and believe it and kind of get that confidence. It's not just for others.
So true. So let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about this world of AI that we're all getting into. So, in the latest Stack Overflow survey from Stack Overflow, they really took a deep dive into AI, and they found out that 70% of developers are already using or plan to use AI tools in their development process. Now, how do you think this is going to impact work, hiring? Like, is that going to change how people get jobs or how people are doing their jobs? What do you think?
Let me narrow down this question because and
Hmm.
reframe it to a more specific question because people always ask me, Nick, how do you think about SQL interviews and coding
Hmm.
interviews in the world of Chat GPT and AI
Mm,
assisted coding? Because that's what people. I'm the interview guy, so that's what people are always asking. Like, do we even need SQL interviews if Chat GPT can write SQL? So let me
mm,
tackle that specific question because it's kind of a
hmm.
subset of this whole AI coding revolution that we're going through. I think what I've told people is think of Chat GPT, think of these things as like a better Stack Overflow.
Hmm.
Even after Stack Overflow is invented, there's still a reason we're asking software engineers to write us code during an interview. And sure, you can look at some API documentation, or sure, if you're really, really stuck, you can go use Stack Overflow. But interviews try to test problem solving skills that things like ChatGPT still can't do, or
Mm,
understanding problem context and thinking a few different strategies. because the actual syntax, yeah, sure, you can look on Stack Overflow, you can look at documentation, maybe ChatGPT can write some actual syntax, but even being able to prompt ChatGPT intelligently to solve a SQL interview question requires a little bit of problem solving on your end. We're not at that point where I can just give it a cold, tough SQL interview question and it can write the code entirely. Because half the issue is how do we like break down the question, or how do we frame the question, how do we frame the prompt. So TLDR, the long story short is, I think that there's still a lot of room for coders and data scientists to know some of these fundamentals and to be ready to do them in interviews. And even though GitHub Copilot's awesome and we have ChatGPT and they have all these other AI assisted code writing tools, I think for the foreseeable future, just like how Stack Overflow didn't kill the software engineer interview, I don't think that ChatGPT will kill the SQL interview or coding interview for any time soon.
That's so true. And I think that people should still know about it. I just wonder how it's going to actually affect the literal job interview process. If anybody can have ChatGPT a system during their coding tests, if that will, we're talking about how, when professors ask students to write, papers about things, since ChatGPT can do so much of it, what does that mean? Should that be now not a thing that people do, or I think that a lot of times the concepts, like understanding what you said when you show up to an interview, it's not necessarily the fact that you can pull up a library of formulas or you have all this experience with the software. It's knowing when to use what, and more of like, in your 10th chapter, you talk about your business sense of product. Like that's maybe something that becomes a little more important.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Maybe over time, syntax becomes less important, but those high level problem solving skills or understanding the business context, or especially for these open ended data science challenges where it's not all about the algorithm you use, but it's just about like even asking the right questions and focusing, what are they even asking, or what's the right thing we should even be doing at a high level. That's the bigger thing. I think all
Mm-hmm.
these AI assisted tools aren't there yet. So maybe over time, the interviews will be less syntax heavy and less like, oh, you forgot a comma here, or hey, it's not called rank, it's called, dense rank. Maybe those
Mm-hmm.
kind of problems go away, but framing the question, I think, will still be really important, and framing your answers and like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So in your book, the middle part of the book, which is the part that I maybe had the most trouble with, had a lot of formulas and stuff. So you covered, I think, over 200 interview questions. So if you were hiring your own data science person, what would be some of the kind of questions that you would want to know from those people?
What I would love to know is what's the hardest bug you faced or hardest thing you had to do in data science. So this is like you did in a project, basically. One
Mm-hmm.
or project or work, basically. Like what was hard about it. I like asking this just to see someone's depth, to see like, okay, what did they get into? How do they overcome this hard problem? What was hard about it? Plus it lets me geek out like, oh yeah, that sounds really tough. Or if I'm like in the back of my head being like, seems like really easy. Like, I don't think you know what you're doing. Right. So that's like one thing I like about that. Two, it's a great way to see like who's done a lot of classwork versus who's actually like done real life data science and real life
Mm.
data work. Because again, it's like, if you don't even have a good war story, that makes me really skeptical. Cause it's like, I mean, sure, you sat there and did some quizzes and maybe you got a certification, but you are not going to have a war story like that. Um,
Mm.
right? So that's one thing I like asking people. And the second part I like doing it is, okay, now you talked about the hardest technical thing. Can you talk to me about like the hardest like kind of people thing? I like this better for
Mm.
people who are more senior, who are managers, because inevitably you're going to find a PM who tries to block you, or you're going to find some dead data engineers who don't give you the right data, or this or that. And I like asking that to kind of get a sense of your behavioral interview skills, your little bit of project management skills. And it's a much easier way to kind of have that conversation than me asking a typical behavioral interview question that's really lame, like, tell me about teamwork. Tell me about a time you worked as a team. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, that's tell me about a challenge. More so, I like to see like, oh, or relate it to that hard technical thing. Like, oh, that's great. Thanks for talking to me about this really hard technical bug. While we're on this topic, did you have any people issues too, or like, how did you deploy to prod? And usually they're
Mm.
like, no, 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 we didn't get deployed to prod because someone blocked it. And I'm like, okay, well, who blocked it and why? And like, how'd that go? And like, what was there? And then we start talking about the people stuff. So I like asking that as one thing to do. And then the second thing is again, for data people, I like asking about like, what's the like gnarliest data set you had to clean?
Mm.
People don't like cleaning data sets. Some people who have done only academic stuff, they work with really clean data from the get-go. I like asking and hearing about people who had to solve really gnarly data cleaning issues. And then I also really like data people who have some more software engineering skills. So
Mhm.
if someone's telling me like, oh, you know what, I actually scraped my own data set, or you know what, actually I had to step in and be a little bit of a data engineer because I noticed there were problems in the pipeline. So actually cleaning it was not just a job for me; it was actually going above the stack and like cleaning the source data because the data engineer had messed up or the warehouse was broken or blah blah blah. That's another thing I like asking about because it's like, okay, great, hearing you step into other people's roles or going upstream, especially at smaller companies where data infrastructure is not very mature, and practically speaking, you as a data person will have to kind of do some data engineering type work or data warehouse type work or database administration work at some point. It's my way to filter that out as well. Tell me about
Mm.
data cleaning or yeah, and if they're just like, oh, everything's handed to me, it's really clean, and I just have to build a model on top of it, I'm like, okay, that's fine, but especially in smaller companies, that's like just not a reality, and so much of our work is just in cleaning the data that it's okay, but it makes me a little suspect, or I'll at least try to double
Mm.
down.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to what you said about, like getting people who have built stuff and understand what actually happens when you have things, when you run into problems. It's really, I think,
Yeah.
what separates great developers or people that understand what this job is about, understand that everybody, I don't know, is happy when things are going well. What happened when, everything, went down? Like, what did you do then? That's kind of, I
Exactly.
think, what proves a person. So I love like all the resources you have available to people. So besides the book, you actually have this like fantastic website at this data lemur. So maybe you can explain why you picked a lemur out of all the animals that you could have picked, and talk a little bit about some of these things that you have here, resources
Yeah.
for people.
Definitely, y'all can check out Data Lemur as a way to practice for SQL interviews for free.
Mhm.
Hundreds of questions asked by real tech companies. We can click on that Facebook one, for example. So this is a real interview question asked to a data scientist at Facebook, and you get the input data, and we have a coding environment where you can actually run the code. And if you're logged in, you can submit the code too and see the solution, get it graded, and all that. Um, what was the question? The
So
question
this is
was,
is this like a partner of the books that I just love I mean,
yeah.
nobody just writes a book and then also builds like a REPL to like run sample code. So this is kind of like the same questions that are in the book, or is it something
Yes.
different?
So there's hundreds of questions on the website. Many of them are
Mm-hmm.
not in the book, but some of them are in the book. And then I tell people in the book, like, hey, you want to go practice it for free? Let's go run the code online, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's kind of like a companion or yeah, it's a companion or buddy to the book, but I think the book is still disjoint and has a lot of material and content that's separate from the website. So I try to run them as two different businesses. Why did I call it Data
Cool.
Lemur? I love that movie Madagascar as a kid.
Oh yeah,
There was
yeah.
King Julian. He likes to move it, move it. I like to move, that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah,
And
of
I knew
course.
my website had to be named Data something because I saw Data
Mm-hmm.
Bricks and Data Dog and like Data Camp. So I was like, all right, I'll be Data something. So I was like, let's pick an animal. And I looked, Data Dog's taken, Data Cat's taken, whatever. So I saw Data Lemur was not taken. So I was like, all right, I like King Julian. I think it's a fun little thing. It's a cute little monkey from Madagascar. Like let's run with it. And the domain was
Super
open,
cool.
so that's the story of Data Lemur.
Yeah, and you also people can find your book just on Amazon. So I'll make sure that in the show notes, I make sure that I link to the book, which is fantastic. As I mentioned, I think you should write a book. Just take chapter 10, make it an entire book because it's so good. And even I think the first few chapters are also just really good for not just data scientists, but anybody trying to get into the industry itself. You have such good experience with that. So yeah, let's go ahead and see if there's any questions that I want to pull up from people. So let me just pull up side by side here and take a look at what people. So somebody, LinkedIn user, sometimes it's just a generic user from LinkedIn. that has some privacy things on, so you can look and apply everywhere, but still look at the companies and make sure the culture is a match for what you're looking for. So how much emphasis did you put on stuff like culture match for yourself, like when looking for these companies?
I don't worry about it too much. I worry about it
Mm-hmm.
if I have an offer in hand, but before that, I'm just trying to get an offer.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like obviously, if this company is doing something really unethical or weird, like fine, whatever. But I'm talking about like amongst your biggest technology companies where there's
Mm-hmm.
thousands and tens of thousands of technical people. I don't even worry about culture match because truthfully, it's so team dependent and org dependent that like no matter what Nvidia says on their site or LinkedIn says or Facebook says about their org and team and
Mm-hmm.
culture, in practice, like I'm looking at pay. I'm looking at who my team is. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the work it is. And it's like you can write all about Google culture, but like some teams at Google are shit. Some teams are awesome. And that's the true at
Mm-hmm.
every big company. So I don't really worry about culture fit, to be honest. Maybe at smaller companies, it's something more noticeable because the CEO has a big impact. Um, but then I also, yeah. But again, it's something that you becomes immediately obvious as you're interviewing for the company at smaller
I think it's
companies because you're literally talking to the
yeah.
leadership and
Maybe it's less important as you're just trying to get your foot in the door, but
yeah,
more important over the long term. And then, like you said, if you end up in a team that perhaps has like a toxic person, that's definitely something that you want to try to avoid. And you can usually see that in the interview, but sometimes you just got to suffer through some jerks to get
yeah.
to a place where you can be a little more choosy, I think.
I guess yeah, a lot of my advice is couched for younger
Hmm.
people or people who are like trying to break into the industry where it's just sort of like I worry about these things later. But you're definitely right. If you're
Hmm.
crushing in your career and you've got a lot of experience, then worry about the culture stuff. But again,
Yeah.
98% of people I talk to are at the earlier stages where it's just like,
Yeah.
let's get
Yeah.
this
So
high
true.
paying job and let's break into Fang. Let's get a great name on the resume. And I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, go for it. Like I get that. Money matters and having a great name on the resume matters. And like if one person's not the nicest or like
Hmm.
this company works you a little harder or this company I don't know doesn't match your health insurance, like okay, fine, whatever, like that's life.
Yeah. So I do like something that Stanley mentions here, that he says, connecting with people outside of your group is also really important. And, I think connections is the key to success in the long term as well. Once you've gotten that foot in the door, you mentioned that you ran into your partner, Kevin, who co-wrote the book, Ace the Data Science Interview with you. How that happened was he just somebody that became your friend and you're able to connect with much later on. So that ability of people to connect with others is really key. And I think sometimes, developers especially tend to be sort of more